Today we have with us Stephanie. How do you say your last name?
Arrowsmith.
Arrowsmith.
Not like Aerosmith like the band, but Arrowsmith.
Right. Arrowsmith. Stephanie Arrowsmith. And I'm very excited to talk to her because she is the founder of Impact Hub Jakarta. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And I've always wanted to learn about Impact Hub. I've been to a few around the world, and I don't know anything about the company, but I find it interesting because they're everywhere, and I want to learn about how it works, who are they, what do they do, and hopefully you can tell us a bit.
I hope so too.
Yeah. So maybe before we jump into Impact Hub, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Like, where were you born and your journey before you started Impact Hub?
Okay. So winding right back to when I was born in Jakarta in Indonesia. So that's where my mom is from. So my mom's Indonesian. My dad's from England. And we grew up in Jakarta for the first 8 years of my life. Went to an international school. That's where this accent comes from. We haven't spent any time in the States as a family. And then we moved to Australia. So Australia became the second home. Jakarta feels like it was it was like my birth home. But I think started to explore identity and who I was a bit more in Australia.
Right.
So Australia became another home, I guess. And I studied public health and anthropology. I was one of those kids that kind of didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I wanted to keep a lot of options open. And I think at the core of it, what drove that was like, I like people and I'm really interested in people. So anthropology felt really right. And I wanted to work in impact, social impact. And I think partly growing up in Indonesia and then moving to a starkly different place really drove that as well. There was a sense of like needing to understand what leads to this kind of inequality and how do you change that. So that was cool. But I spent a lot of my university years actually trying to get away from study. So I think I did 4 study abroads. I went to Denmark. I studied there. I went to Guatemala, New York, and then as soon as I could graduate, I was like back on the road again.
That's four study abroad. That's like not common.
Yeah, I think the study abroad department, actually my uni was like, we think you're hacking the system.
Like,
you're
are you
not
really
supposed
studying?
Like, do you even go to university here? Like, we never see you. So that was fun. And I think it showed me that I had such a strong drive to take my career abroad. And so much of my learning was through travel, through meeting people. That was like kind of the classroom for me. So yeah, I guess finishing that, I went on to work for a couple of nonprofits. First one was in New York, Global Poverty Project and Global Citizen. So they work in advocacy for international development issues and use gamification. So you earn points by taking actions online, and then you can convert that into like merch or like seeing your favorite bands live and that kind of thing. So that was cool, but I wanted to get a bit closer to the heart of impact and back to people, because a lot of that was online activism, and I wanted to get back to the people activism. And I think there was a part of me, honestly, that was really yearning to go back to Indonesia. Partly, if I'm honest, I think it was a bit of finding myself and also to find that impact I was really looking for. So against my mom's wishes, I left a job offer to stay in New York, and I moved to Asia. And I say Asia broadly because I was backpacking.
Right.
To be honest, for like first 6 months.
Yeah.
I was just moving around, making sense of what was happening. And as I was backpacking around, I was interning for Start Some Good, which is a crowdfunding platform for social entrepreneurs. And that was my first taste of like, what is this thing called social entrepreneurship? Who does it actually serve? And I got to meet on the road some of these entrepreneurs who had raised their first, couple $100,000 to set up their business. And it was kind of very disruptive in terms of the access to early capital, very, very early capital. So that was cool, but I came across these impact hubs. So I was in Manila, and then I was like, okay, what is this impact hub thing? And then I went over to Cambodia, and there was another one. And then I came to Singapore, and there was Impact Hub in Singapore. So it was really interesting because there were these communities that had really similar values, supporting social entrepreneurs, but in very different cultural and geographic contexts. And that's how I first came across Impact Hub.
That's really, really interesting, because I also came across Impact Hub when I was backpacking, and I would see these spaces, and I didn't really know exactly what they were, but I was very interested in learning about the spaces.
Yeah.
What do you think drove you to go into the social impact space? Because it seems like you were very interested in that very early on when you were in university. Were there any sort of trigger points or any specific things happen in your life where you said, instead of going into mainstream corporate world, I want to do social entrepreneurship?
I think that moment, or the penny, really dropped for me when I graduated from university in Australia. I was thinking back to like that other life that could have happened if we didn't have the opportunity. Our family left Indonesia in quite a hurry. It was in '97, so the fall of Suharto, and amidst a lot of chaos. And I remember that there was a subset of that community that had a ticket out of this because of their luck or their privilege or whatever that might be. And there's a subset of community that had to be stay in a country where there was immense inequality, and that just never seemed fair. And so it's felt like something that I've always needed to resolve. And then feeling that there's almost a burden to the experience of being able to access education in Australia. It felt like it was absolutely necessary for me to use that as a way to create some kind of equal platform. And not go back to Indonesia in a way where I had the solutions, but trying to create something that could help enable all the amazing creative Indonesian entrepreneurs that I know who have solutions to their own challenges. And that was, for me, I think, Impact Hub, taking that kind of space as a platform to bring people together around that.
What does impact has so many different definitions, and social entrepreneurship has so many various different definitions. What does social entrepreneurship, or what does impact mean to you? How do you define it?
Yeah, I think I take a broader term, because I don't want the word social entrepreneurship or social impact to isolate people. I think everyone actually has a core fundamental responsibility to operate that way, whether you are a corporate business or a small entrepreneur. So sometimes that language feels really isolating. I take a broad approach. I look at social impact as generating positive social and environmental gains, or offsetting that through the work that you're doing. So it can be either built into a business, whereby as your profit increases or your product or service scales, so does the offset of the impact that you're creating, either for a beneficiary that's outside of the business, or actually for the customer, if that customer is the beneficiary. So I think there's a couple of models that, like across my work, we've always used different definitions, but fundamentally I think it's making sure that the mission and the vision of success for your business is closely aligned with positive environmental and social impacts.
Any companies or corporations or any entities, organizations that you sort of look at to say this is a really good definition of social impact or social entrepreneurship?
Let's see. I don't know if I could single out a couple, because I think also contextually it's quite different. So a social impact organization or entrepreneur in the US might operate really differently, or their impact model looks really different to one in Indonesia. But I would say there's like a full spectrum. To your point of, there's social entrepreneurs that are maybe setting up businesses at early stages, and they're building in the impact to their work. You also have corporations that have an amazing opportunity to build social impact into their supply chains. And we're seeing that at the level of, have you heard of B corporations?
Yes, I have,
So those are kind of more mainstream corporates or larger organizations, but they're saying, hey, through our business, we have an opportunity to scale social or environmental impact and track that impact. So I think that trend is really cool, rather than going, oh yeah, that's for the social entrepreneurs to solve. So us as corporates, we're going to kind of do our own thing. Everyone should be measuring their outputs, and hopefully positive outputs.
So social entrepreneurship or social impact, would you say is from an organizational perspective, it's different than a nonprofit or an NGO, right? Because these can be for-profit companies that are ticking the box is probably not the right term, but they're achieving certain social goods, or they're maybe it's the UNDP or the UN.
Sustainable Development Goals.
Sustainable Development Goals. They're actually achieving some of those goals consciously. That they're actually organizationally making an effort to say these are things that we're going to really accomplish, right?
Yeah, and it should be at the center of their work. So much so that as their work scales and they are making profits, so is their impact. So those metrics shouldn't be kept kind of separate, but the metrics around the more you sell your product or service, the more impact that you're creating as well.
Right.
Some of the most, I think, integrated impact business models are where the social entrepreneur is serving the customer who they're serving. That's the impact that they're creating. So they're building a product or service to serve a underserved market, often because government hasn't provided a good service to these individuals. So I think those are where you get creative solutions. When you treat these beneficiaries in donor or NGO terms, beneficiaries are sometimes they're recipients, but they're not treated like customers. Their core needs, their core desires, the agency to choose the product and service is not usually considered in that dynamic. So I think that's what sets social entrepreneurs apart. They're really serving the underserved communities as a customer, as a paying customer, as a respected customer with dignity. And I think that changes the dynamics a bit, and the market pushes it to become a better product and a better service for them. And generally, social entrepreneurs operate with for-profit models as well, and that generates usually more sustainability. But we do see variance.
Right. Interesting. Okay, let's go back to your backpacking days, because I think this is something we share in common, like our love for adventure travel, backpacking.
And I told you I stayed here before.
That's right. Yeah. That's how we connected last time you were here.
Exactly.
So maybe you can tell us about your backpacking days after you graduated. You were moving back to Asia. So you spent 6 months traveling to. What was that like, and how did that help you with what you're doing now?
Yeah. Oh wow, it's bringing back such wonderful memories. Those were like my golden years. It feels like my golden years. And this was kind of when digital nomad wasn't really a fixed term yet. It was like starting to emerge. It was amazing. I think also so liberating for me as a solo female traveler. There's so many parts of my learning that I gained just through the experience of that. So many friends I made, and I think new confidence and love of people. Like you start to find these universal traits and truths about people, and it makes you just much more inspired and positive about the world. So I started in Philippines, and then I just worked my way down. So Vietnam, Thailand, I went through Cambodia as well, Malaysia, Singapore, then through Indonesia again. And I was going to impact hubs in order to find and meet with social entrepreneurs, but I was staying at backpackers in order to find and connect with other people. There was nothing like this before, nothing like Draper Startup House when I was around, but I would have absolutely loved that, finding the right type of humans with similar values in one place.
But this is exactly why we started this, because I had a similar experience. Well, I was backpacking, and I felt the market was missing a place for people to live, work, connect, network. That combination of an offering as a hospitality service was missing. So that's why we're building this. So it seems like you were also you could have benefited if a concept like this.
100%. Because I never saw myself as, I guess, a typical traveler. Like I wasn't staying in a couple of days in one place and moving on. I was staying weeks at a time in one place. So I needed a bit of a micro community to make me feel really grounded. And I think similar to you, I was always starting projects. So even if I was in one place, I was talking to someone, and we'd be generating ideas, going, okay, how do we make this happen?
This is exactly was my path when I was, and you bring up Cambodia, which is a very interesting case study for me, because my favorite impact hub that I've been to, I haven't been to too many, but I've been to a few, is the one in Phnom Penh.
That's awesome.
And it's when I was backpacking in Phnom Penh, I stayed at Mad Monkey, which is a hostel, which is a party hostel.
Yes, I've definitely partied.
Awesome hostel, amazing, super fun, just amazing. But the aha moment for me was all of these backpackers are coming to Cambodia to really learn about Cambodian culture and the history, and but they spend 80% of the time like partying and going to the nightclubs, and the environment is made for them to really just party, stay within their groups of people, go to the pool, hang out of the pool. And I just was like, I don't, like, if there was an environment where they were offered like, hey, you can actually go volunteer at a company, explore more of the local entrepreneurship ecosystem, I bet they would take it up in a heartbeat, because that's like the reason why they came to these countries, right?
And that's truly connecting with, right? And I think there's just been a lack of accessible ways to do that, and like safe ways to do that. Because the flip side is, when we've seen that happening on its own without sort of a mediator, facilitator locally, we've also seen volunteering go like really skewed in dangerous paths when foreigners are like, oh, I can do that. So I think there's a role, and I think this is the role that impact hubs and spaces like this play, is like that anchor in the community that helps to mediate this like wonderful global exchange that's happening, but to do it in the right way. And I was really lucky, because with the crowdfunding platform I was working with at the time, it was my mission to go out and meet these social entrepreneurs. I would interview them, I would ask them about the business they're starting, or what's their story behind what they're doing, and help them craft their campaign and their ask. So it really got me out there in the field, but without that, it would have been really hard. Like, where do you start?
Yeah, exactly. Where do you start? I mean, for us, we know, because we've traveled, we kind of know, like, okay, if I go to Manila, I know where to go. But if you're from Europe, first time to Manila, you don't, you need an entry point. Like, you need that first introduction. You need the first landing pad. Okay, so you're backpacking and you fell in love with people and cultures, but then you also then discovered Impact Hub. So I would love to learn about what is Impact Hub, where did it get started, who started it, what's the business model, how long has it been? I mean, just tell us all about Impact Hub.
All the things, because I had all these questions as well. So I kind of like hung around and attached myself to all the founders of Impact Hub, and I was like, tell me everything. Because I was already thinking and seeding this idea of what would it look like in Indonesia, and I was looking at the global network of Impact Hub, and I think at the time there was maybe around, it was like 80 bridging 90 impact hubs.
Which is a lot.
A lot. They're mainly in Europe, so it's still at that time quite a Eurocentric kind of network. And I was like, you know what? Indonesia should be on this map. There should be an impact hub in Jakarta. And I loved the idea of the network-based movement. So we can have local sort of hubs that are catering to our local communities, but still be connected to this global community and global mission. So I guess Impact Hub in a nutshell is a global network of innovation hubs and spaces. They're all independently and locally owned, but we share the same values, mission, branding, and a lot of global support infrastructure that we share with each other. So that really helps out when you're starting from the beginning. You have a bit of a blueprint, you have other mentors who have been through that journey of setting up a hub. But you can determine your own business model, essentially, based on what works for your market. So,
Okay, so it's not cut and dry in terms of like policies that you have to follow. It's essentially you take the brand and you become part of the network, but you can build your own business model.
You build your own business model, because the idea is it should reflect what your market and what your community needs. Having said that, to get to that point is quite rigorous, and in a good way. So what it requires from you is you submit initial interest and application. You need a team of at least 3 founders initially. You prepare a market analysis, stakeholder analysis. You basically put together a pitch for what you imagine and vision your hub to look like, and what are the impact metrics that you're going to be targeting. Who are the communities of social entrepreneurs that you're serving? What's a typical profile? How large is that addressable market? All these things you work through, and you submit that application to the network. Now, every single established impact hub has a vote into this network. So it's a large democratized process. It almost feels like the UN, but like A-type personalities, and everyone kind of like with a business edge. But everyone looks at your application and they vote you into the network or not, based on that. So are the values really aligned with us? Do they have a robust business model that can serve that market? Are they the right people to be leading this? All those things are considered, and you need a majority vote in order to get through that gate. Once you're through that gate, you go through a 6-month to 8-month onboarding journey. We were really lucky when we started. We partnered with an existing space, so we were able to turn around quite quickly. We didn't have to build a space from scratch.
Right.
But yeah, that's the typical journey, and we got to determine our own business model, who we're going to support, our own pricing. But the things that had to stay consistent at a minimum were the branding elements. Of course, the core mission and values.
Right.
We translated a lot of that across into Indonesia and our context. And we participate in global governance. I think that's what makes it unique as well. It's not a passive network. It's every decision made that impacts all of the hubs. So if for example, we change the mission statement, that's not something that someone's going to do on their own. They're going to consult all the impact hubs and say, hey, does this align with your local reality as well?
Where did the first impact hub start? So it started in Europe. And
started in the UK. I believe it was King's Cross. I might get that wrong.
And what year was that?
That was 10 years ago, actually.
So it's not 10 years is not a long time.
It's not a huge amount of time, but it did go through some iterations. So you might know some people who were part of the first iteration of Impact Hub, and it wasn't called Impact Hub. It was actually called the Hub.
Okay.
That was the first prototype of it, and it started in the UK, and with a couple of friends, they branched that out into the rest of Europe.
Right. And this is before co-working spaces became a thing. So they were the original co-working spaces.
They were really like the original, and very experimental around business models as well, and what was working. And so they had they started to get really early brand equity through what they were doing. I think there was a pivotal moment, and I wasn't involved in the hub at this point, so I don't know all the details, but there's a pivotal moment where everyone said, hey, do we want to use this hub structure as a force for good? And if so, we need to be more intentional about it. Like, how do we signal that this is what we want to create? And so that's how Impact became part of the Impact Hub.
Right. And was it started by one person, a few people?
It was a collective.
It was a collective from the very beginning. Interesting.
Yeah, and I think so that has kind of spiraled out into a network-based model, and I think they call it social franchising. I think that might be the technical word around it, because it's not a typical franchise like here's your package, like start a business. It's really about investing in mentoring and supporting someone to customize the business to suit your local reality.
So it's not a franchise.
No, we pay a licensing fee to stay part of the network. There's, of course, a lot that goes into maintaining the brand and maintaining all the global assets, so that feeds back in. And then we also get to vote on how the resources are spent across the network as well.
And are there audits done to make sure that every space is complying with the...
Yeah. So we submit quarterly reports, which is like a bit of this is the impact that's happening. These are some of the stories from our entrepreneurs. This is how we're doing in terms of revenue. And then based on that, we also get an aggregate of how all the global impact hubs are performing. Right. And that happens every year. So we do annual reports.
And so each space pays a licensing fee to the parent company, and that's the business model.
Yeah, and it's relative to the I guess to the revenue that you're making your local hub, because as you know, like operation in Jakarta looks very different to the New York hub. And in terms of how much we'll be generating.
And so each location is self-sovereign. You make your own. So how is the business model in Jakarta different than the business model, say, in the UK or in any other place?
So in cities, so this is interesting. We went in with a lot of assumptions that space was going to be the core need. And we had seen that, of course, open spaces were doing really, really well, like open, flexible co-working. And so our first space in Jakarta really was built around that assumption. That wasn't the case. People weren't super comfortable in open spaces and working in open spaces as much, and there was much more of a demand and drive for private offices. Whereas in the UK or in New York, that was part of the culture. It was a bit more acceptable and embraced. And I think there was more of a premium on physical space and real estate. In Indonesia or Jakarta, at least, like it is expensive, but relative to these other big cities, like physical space isn't that expensive. So we found we had to pivot a lot on that model. And I would say, being in an emerging market, most of our, other than the startups that work with us, most of our business comes in from programming. And I think especially because whether it's corporations or international development funds, they're all trying to support market-based approaches to development.
Right.
So in Indonesia, we have been able to design and deliver programs that help source some of these types of entrepreneurs working on big development challenges,
right.
And be that intermediary between a lot of global institutions. And I think that's quite a unique model for, particularly for the emerging markets of the Impact Hub network.
Which sounds very similar to sort of what we're doing, because I like to compare our business to hardware and software.
Yeah.
So the hardware is the physical space, the leases, the contracts, the operations, and then the software piece is really the programming, the education, the investment platform that we have. Is that sort of similar to what you're doing too?
Yeah, and the community building aspect, I think being engaged in touch and building trust with the community has its own equity. It's the heartbeat, right? Like you can have a physical space, but it's not going to be filled with people. You're not going to have trust with the community, and people won't work with you if you're not really delivering that value.
Yeah. Well, that's the hardest piece, because that's a lot of work.
Oh, it is, and it's human capital, right? It's not something that you can outsource to software. There's some elements of that process that can make it more efficient, but it always, just riffing off what you're saying, it's the hardware, right? How do you scale that? Because it's human to human relationship.
It's the hardware, okay.
Hardware. We can coin that term. I've never used that before, by the way. That's just.
It's a good term. Hardware. It's the hardware. Okay.
But yeah, I feel like community spaces are built on that.
Yeah.
And honestly, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but in the early stages, we had a ton of burnout in our team because we didn't factor in how much, as founders too, I have to say, the first 2 years was built off of my networks and social capital, and it was tiring but exciting and exhilarating at the same time. Every day there was a new adventure. And then trying to also impart that and support our team members while not burning out, that was also really tricky.
Right. So in your space in Jakarta, in terms of the hardware, is the business model you lease a space, you put in the capex, you run the operations, and I'm guessing it's mostly workspace, so you don't have the accommodation piece.
We don't have the accommodation piece, no.
And each location has to then do their own contracts, their own capex to get the space up and running? Yep,
exactly. And we are now looking at every business model also has its own types of innovations. We looked into a partnership model because we knew the physical space wasn't our core value. It was important, absolutely important, but it wasn't our core value necessarily. So rather than us investing in owning our own physical space, for example, we partnered with space owners and said, hey, you guys offer really amazing space. We can bring the people and community and the programming that brings the space to life. And so we have a really nice revenue model, which means our destinies are tied together. So the success of the space depends on our success and vice versa. And we work quite closely with each other to fill the seats and bring people to the physical space, rent out offices, but also to make the programs work and the community building work.
So you go to a real estate owner, say, hey, you have this awesome building, but it doesn't have any soul, it doesn't have any brand. Why don't we bring Impact Hub? We'll run it, we'll operate it, we'll do a revenue share. And is that
pretty much, and we worked with them. So we're in our second space in Jakarta. We moved out of the first one. That was kind of our testing, prototyping. And then second space, we really got to fit it out the way we wanted to. So really get that mix of spaces our entrepreneurs were really looking for. So smaller rooms of for teams of 4 all the way up to 10. Have a huge event space because so much of what we do is in our events as well, and bringing people to the space. We have a little coffee shop inside, about this size as well, because especially in Indonesia, food bring people together. Same in Singapore. So we got to design it with everything we learned about what our communities needed.
Right. So it seems very similar to what we're doing, except it doesn't have that hostile component to it. Is that something you've sort of thought about, or?
We actually have. One of our co-founders is super passionate about co-living. He's actually set up a project. He had a project in Jakarta, actually south of Jakarta, and also in Bali. So we've always wanted to pair those elements together because he's always been in hospitality. But we haven't found I think we're still kind of figuring out and exploring the right market fit for that. because it would have been amazing. We actually get a lot of referrals from impact hubs in Europe and some in North America, some in Middle East, and they're like, hey, one of my hubbers, one of my members is coming over to Indonesia.
Yeah.
Can they come and stay at the hub? And it would have been amazing to have that together.
Right.
We did strike deals with hotels to get packages set up, but you lose the consistency of the experience. It would have been amazing to have the other component though.
Well, as you know, this is something we're trying to figure out, right? Because we have spaces in 10 countries. Some are small, some are very big. So in Manila, we have a whole building, and it's a massive hotel. We have the whole building. It's right on Poblacion, and it has 80 beds and workspace and coffee shop, and it's the whole shebang. But that model from Manila may not be, during these times, doesn't quite work because travel is restricted. So we're trying to figure out the right model as well, and we haven't quite figured out the right model. What you've seen the co-working, co-living sort of evolution. What are your thoughts in terms of what's working, what's not working, and where is it headed?
For co-working and co-living?
Yeah, in general, just that entire industry in general.
Yeah, I when I've been thinking about this, I have two reactions. I think that people are, through this experience of COVID, there have been more hyper-local community building efforts, and I think people are seeing that they need to work together more deeply. I feel like partnership and collaboration is more valued than ever before.
Yeah.
So I see that that's going to reinforce the value of these types of spaces, but I think there will be inevitably less international exchange.
Yeah.
And for us, that was honestly one of the things that was our unique selling point.
You're very local.
Yeah. Yeah, and like when we used to have a lot of exchange from global impact hubs. That's not going to happen as much anymore.
Right.
And having said that, we're still running programs. We call them translocal programs. So it's where Impact Hub Jakarta collaborates with, say, Manila, Phnom Penh, Yangon, and we design and deliver a program together. And that's kind of cool because through our programmings, we can bridge some of our communities.
Yeah.
There's definitely interest for our local startups to kind of meet other entrepreneurs in other places. Yeah. So we're going to try and move in that direction a little bit more, kind of scale that hardware a bit, to a regional level. But we'll see. What are your reactions around?
Well, I really want to do something in Jakarta.
You haven't done something in Jakarta yet?
No. So the plan was we're going to Bali, which is a digital nomad hub. So
I've also been to your Bali.
Right.
hub.
Well, when did you go?
I went with George, so maybe it was like 2 years ago.
Okay, so it's dramatically changed.
Yeah, it was still tribe theory back then.
Yeah, well, but now we have like massive space, like rice paddies. We have a massive garden, so it's much nicer now. But the idea was to always go into Bali because Bali has like this low-hanging fruit of digital nomads. At least pre-COVID it did. So we knew that it could be a good place to start. But we definitely want to go into Jakarta at some point and do something in Jakarta. And so this partnership model, I think, could be interesting to explore because I think Jakarta is, as you rightfully said, it's a very local market. Yeah. There's not a lot of international travel coming into Jakarta, right?
Yeah. And honestly, a lot of our entrepreneurs, we're actively trying to work with this and around this as well. A lot of our experience with entrepreneurs is, you look at the Indonesia market, and if you can capture that market, that is massive. The appetite to necessarily go regional or global, I have seen is not as strong, for example, as like an entrepreneur in Singapore or elsewhere. Yeah. So we're trying to, I think it is a very hyper-local market, and so that can be in our favor during COVID in terms of expanding that.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can collaborate on something in Jakarta. I mean, we have experience in doing hospitality concepts and running operations of living spaces, and so I think that combination could be
100%. And I think that is the insight for me, is it's multimodal.
Yeah.
It's no longer just a co-working space, just a co-living space. I think it's actually multimodal community spaces that's what's going to be the most adaptive to, let's be honest, what will be a continually changing environment over the next couple of years.
Yeah. And I think the programming piece will also evolve in the sense that I think a lot of the programming being done right now is it's like, so we do a lot of education stuff, but I think programming in terms of building prototypes for companies, actually having a network of technical abilities, of talent in Manila or in Ukraine, and then using all of that to actually create things for companies is going to be a programming piece that I think it's from a business model perspective
definitely
could be really interesting. And so Impact Hub, you were saying, went through like evolutions and changes. Where is it now, and like where is it going?
Yeah, so we actually just had a EGA, a General Assembly online, actually. Every year we do get together, all the founders get together for what is kind of a massive shareholders meeting. So we were actually the 100th Impact Hub to join the network.
Oh, nice number.
Yeah, we were super happy about the number. We saw it like proudly displayed. So on the first year I joined the General Assembly. It was an in-person event in Berlin, and it was a 1-week retreat where all the shareholders of Impact Hubs get together, and we determine the future and the direction of where Impact Hub is going. This year we were supposed to go to Lisbon, but it didn't happen, sadly. But we did do the elections and voting on motions online. So I think in response to COVID, one of the directions we are going is having a more of a flexible partnership model. I would say because Impact Hub does have a very strong brand, it has also inhibited the opportunity to partner with, say, other co-working spaces, other impact-driven spaces, because we're not the only ones, for sure. We're the only ones who have just said, hey, we're going to do our work under this banner to be connected to the Impact Hub network.
But I think Impact Hub is probably the only brand that has such global reach, right, as a brand. Like, what other brand from a physical space perspective has that?
That's a good point. I mean, other than WeWork, but that is but you can see the precarity, right, in those types of models. So I think something we were reflecting on as a network is something that's made us very resilient. Only 2 hubs have closed during the pandemic, which was surprising. I honestly thought more would.
That's very surprising.
It's very surprising.
And why is that?
I think it's because of the resilience of these locally owned models. Like when you don't have all that risk aggregated at that level, you can actually distribute that risk. And we have also, the network has helped us massively. So we organized a partnership with Kiva to provide short-term loans to Impact Hubs who needed it. So working at a network level, there's these kinds of collective support mechanisms that you can benefit from as well, which has been really evident during COVID.
Wow, that's really interesting. Why hasn't there been a lot more conversation around Impact Hub? I'm just curious because like co-working as a concept has gone through a lot of exposure in the media, right? With WeWork and other companies, but Impact Hub is never in the news. Is that by design, or do you feel, because it's something I think everyone can learn from, right? Because it's been around for 10 years. It seems to be doing well. Why are more people not talking about that model?
That's a very, very fair question. I think we don't focus enough on storytelling and of like what we're doing. And I think our market is much smaller because we do focus on impact entrepreneurship. It's not, we don't capture the market of tech and what other spaces and communities capture. So I think that business model struggles. I know it hasn't been super smooth here in Singapore, for example. There was actually really strong Impact Hub here, led by Grace, who did amazing ecosystem building work and really brought that impact ecosystem together. But with the constraints of, I think, fewer social entrepreneurs in Singapore, high costs of rent, like that business model struggled because it is so niche. Yeah, so that could be one of the reasons, but and I think the model that I described, like when you apply to become, it's not just about having enough money to start a hub. You have to go through these processes of peer due diligence, essentially. And I think that is a lot of work. As someone who's been through it, it is a lot of work.
But I guess maybe one of the reasons why it hasn't been in the news, because it's not really a commercial model, because each space is like mom and pop, and that's and the economics don't trickle up to a centralized company that has, that can say, hey, we have this balance sheet, we have this P&L.
And not ultimately, to be honest, not really driven by that profit gain, driven by the impact gains. But the goal is to stay sustainable and hopefully at a really healthy level, but not to drive profits back to shareholders. So that's also another reason why.
But I think it's fascinating because it's clearly been around for such a long time that there's some components to it which I think commercial models can learn from. So your space in Jakarta, was it super impacted when like WeWork came in and other competitors came in?
Yeah, for sure. I think while WeWork and other competitors didn't focus as much on community and programming, I mean, they could definitely offer the space at a much lower price. And when we're working with social entrepreneurs, we know it's a very price-sensitive market as well. So that was tricky. And there were instances where there was just outright, like, not very cool kind of like poaching of members. So we were impacted by that. But I think ultimately it also helped us narrow in on the market that we want to serve as well. And right now we've been focusing on a lot more virtual programming and investing in our digital infrastructure to deliver really good programs online. And the Global Impact Hub just launched a new community app to connect all of the Impact Hub members from around these 103 Impact Hubs now together. We had to close the space for a while, so we turned it into a podcasting studio. So I think we still have that actually.
Yeah, nice.
So we've been kind of innovating on ways to use the existing space while it's empty. So kind of like this. Sort of, but it's like a little bubble space. But I feel like we're on the same track. Like we're having similar ideas. So and I want to really build on this multimodal concept. Like what could the future of these spaces look like? Because I think right now is a really good time to sit down and reassess.
Yeah, I completely agree. And this is something that we spend a lot of time in trying to understand. And I feel that the future of these types of spaces, it's going to be more full stack than people think it should be. And really the reason is you just need multiple revenue streams as a business. And it's like, however you want to term it, name it, co-living, co-working, whatever it is, I just think it needs to be a full stack hospitality model. And hospitality it's entertainment, it's connections, it's spaces, it's community, it's
experiences,
It's experiences for sure. And so I think the combination of education, building things, networks, entertainment, then those spaces become more resilient. And can go through lots of different types of downturns. But with Impact Hub, are you allowed to build spaces in multiple cities or multiple countries, or are you once you're in Jakarta, you're stuck in Jakarta?
So interestingly, we have a license per city. We actually have to map out the geography of how we define Jakarta as a city. Having said that, there are also, so in Madrid, for example, there are multiple buildings within the city limits that are under one license. And we are actually moving to a model where if you're an existing founder and you have a license in one place, we're opening up opportunities to more easily also open up other city locations. If you look in Germany, what they've done is they've created a kind of a mini umbrella Impact Hub, so Impact Hub Bavaria, which looks at the Impact Hubs as a cluster there. So I think that's emerging. We're quite actively involved in the APAC regional cluster. Includes 13 hubs all the way from New Zealand to Dhaka. All of our hubs, and we get together every month and we're sharing programs, business leads, opportunities, creating new member experiences. And so we're seeing also, I think the evolution of Impact Hubs is also a global network, but there's also different layers of that network experience too.
Wow, so much to unpack here. It's a lot. I've always wanted to learn about Impact Hub, so I think this has been like really awesome for me. Are you gonna continue building on Impact Hub Jakarta? Do you want to be in more cities? What's the future for you and Impact Hub?
I will always, I think at the heart of my work and practice will always be community building, and building that hub in Jakarta brings me back to the community that I'm ultimately trying to serve, and gives me that like connection to people. More of my work now has moved into more regional, global consulting, which has been absolutely fascinating and rewarding to create impact at that scale. But I will always like need the heartbeat of going back to like people level impact as well. So I think I want to continue down in this space, but maybe broaden that a bit, and rather than looking at cities, looking at countries and regions as well.
And how involved are you on a day-to-day basis with Impact Hub Jakarta?
Yeah, so I'm being based here in Singapore now. My involvement as a shareholder is I get on calls and support the team locally, help them navigate a lot of challenges, especially right now. But we have a CEO and a full team there, and that's been a process. Like, you know, like you start something and you are trying to find your identity and your space while also letting something breathe and thrive and develop its own character. It was really tough for me initially, like leaving Jakarta and leaving the thing behind that you've like poured everything into. But it's also important, right, for it to be able to grow and thrive. You should be able to step away from it.
Right.
And it forces you to build in all of these systems that are kind of, you think are inherent in the approach. So I have a soulful connection and a soulful involvement in the space. And back when we could travel, I was actually visiting every month just to stay in touch with the team. They're my second family, really.
Well, which is great because you started it, but now you can kind of give it to someone else to do the day-to-day, which is I think it's a great luxury in a sense.
It allows me to support, I still spend a lot of time on Impact Hub, not so much on Jakarta, but I am actively involved in our regional cluster in APAC, so looking at ways that our hubs can work with one another, globally involved in a lot of strategic calls, and I love that stuff. For me, part of this whole experiment was learning how do you build a thriving network of decentralized, like, you know, agents of change around the world that are working towards something. So as being part of Impact Hub was really just about learning what is the back end infrastructure that allows like social change to happen through spaces. Yeah.
I'd like to take this opportunity to get some advice from you.
Sure.
Because we don't really know exactly what we're doing. We have a mission and we have a vision for what we want to do with Draper Startup House. I really want to build a global commercial hospitality brand. Like that's from the physical perspective, right? I really want there to be a hospitality brand in the world, synonymous to say, you know, the Holiday Inn or the Banyan Tree. Now these are very much purely accommodation focused brands. But I feel there needs to be in this world a new category of a hospitality brand that's in every major city of the world, where people know if I go and stay at a Draper Startup House, I get the full stack experience of accommodation, entertainment, education, workspace, networks, and that's a goal. To drive change in the world through a commercial hospitality brand. In order to achieve that, I think we're going to have to tweak the model along the way. What have you learned and seen in your days with Impact Hub that you think we should be aware of in terms of pitfalls or things that we could actually do more of or less of to achieve this goal, right? Because as you know, to build a hospitality brand, the physical piece is very important to get that right from an economics model, right? Do you do leases? How much capex do you do? Do you do management contracts? Do you know, how much capex do you put in? How long should be the lease term? Do you own the building? Like all of these things, these are the things that we have to get right in order for it to become a commercially viable business. Any advice? Advices?
What does your model look like right now when you go into new cities and countries? Are they locally owned and operated, or like what is the process of identifying that city? And
we're currently completely centralized in the sense that we have the Singaporean company, which then owns all these legal entities around the world. We have local teams that run the spaces, but the ownership is majority parent company and minority local founders. So for instance, in Chiang Mai, the founder of the space owns a very sizable stake in the Thailand operations, and then the parent company owns majority, and we provide the capital for them to launch the space. that's the model currently, but clearly it'll have to evolve. But we needed to get something going and started.
Yeah.
So
almost like seeding that, right?
That's right. So we call it like we're in the valley of death. Like at some point, we're going to have to climb up to the right or to the left, where we go asset light or we go asset heavy.
Yeah.
But right now, we're in the valley of death. And the goal was to climb out somewhere this year, but the situation has been not easy to climb out. But at some point, we're going to have to climb out.
Yeah, yeah. Because I was asking that because I think there's something in the lesson that all these impact hubs have local skin in the game.
Yeah.
And I think it also helps to create a consistency in the experience. I think one of the things hospitality brands and these types of brands promise you is a really rich, high quality and consistent experience, whether you go from one place to another. And I think one of the challenges is how to create that, and you need people who are going to not just be ambassadors and champions, but really own the same values and own the same strive for the same experience that you want to create. They need to embody that as well. So making sure that how do you build in that ownership and skin in the game into as you scale out, because as soon as that experience starts to change, the sort of that it starts to take away from that brand equity of that promised or guaranteed experience. And I think something that Impact Hub has grappled with is ultimately the success has really come down to strong founders. Like when there hasn't been consistency in the founders' values or where they want to take it, it has created a different experience for members. It's not consistent with the Impact Hub values. And that is really, it's very disjointed and impacts the brand ultimately.
Do you think, and I want you to be super candid, do you think what we're trying to do has the potential to become a commercially viable hospitality brand?
Absolutely. Yep. And I think knowing your market squarely and understanding that market and their needs, because right now there isn't, at least I haven't seen a hospitality brand that can be as accessible to a growing, more mobile market like this. And I think there is already something unique in what that's offering, but having that the breadth of places, right, to make it accessible and the continued experience will be really interesting. And what are the types of experiences that might connect these places as well?
How do we 10x or 100x what we're doing now in terms of effort?
For me, I always go through partnerships. Scale with other people who have the same goals of scaling and can bring something of different value. Obviously not a competitor, but someone who sees and believes in your vision but brings something unique to you, whether it's a set of customers that fit that target market. I feel like you're already doing that through the Draper experience and partnering with academic institutions. You are already plugging in access to that community or the customers, that will benefit from the space. So scaling through and reimagining the types of partners that you especially unexpected ones. I call them unlikely allies. They can be the fast track way to scale, but also high risk. I would say high risk, high reward.
Any specific partners you think would be good for us?
Just trying to think who comes to mind. I feel like because education is a core area, and I don't know if you can do this within your partnerships, but scaling that out. I mean, I feel like if this was around during while I was studying abroad and I was hacking the study abroad system and built into university experience, more than ever, it's not just universities, more than ever we are valuing these types of experiences as a legitimate form of education and plugging that into building startups or supporting local startups. That experience model you were kind of sharing in Cambodia. I mean, if that was more, it was packaged in a way that was more accessible and had the reputation and credibility that academic institutions can trust. That's the bridging role that I think is really interesting. How do you broker the sort of partners that might have risk adversity to help them, help take away that risk and give them the credibility of these types of local experiences? I think that could be an interesting space to explore, and I think you're really well placed.
I think so too. I'm really excited, but I know there's a lot of challenges to achieve what we want to do, because the roadmap is we have to sort of build a new roadmap on how to do this, because we're not a traditional hospitality business, we're not a traditional accelerator, we're not a traditional education institution. So
you're creating a new market.
We're creating a new category,
yeah.
and that's what excites me. I really want to create this new category, because like you and I know there's a need for it, because you and I have been through that journey where we know, wow, like this needs to exist. And so, well,
what's the closest to what you've seen that embodies that vision?
The closest, there's two companies. One is Selena, which is
yes. I haven't.
Amazing hospitality brand. They started in South America. They're all over South America. Now they're in parts of Europe. I love the brand. I think it's fantastic. They figured out the real estate piece. They've really figured that out.
How did they figure that out?
Well, the founders are real estate people, so they know how to structure real estate deals with owners, with joint venture partners. They figured out the real estate piece, which is what makes it commercially viable. So I love what Selena is doing. I think we're very much of a complement to what they're doing. We're not a competitor to Selena, because Selena is actually very wide in terms of their audience, whereas we're much more niche. So I love what Selena's doing. I love what the student hotel is doing. The student hotel has like spaces all over Europe, and they're a commercially viable hotel brand around education and being a student for life. I love that. Those two, I would say, are probably the two that I watch and like take inspiration from. Also, I think the Generator hostels have done a really good job. But they're very much like a mass brand. But I would say Selena, the student hotel. But really, the awesome thing is, it's only a handful of companies that I would say are similar-ish to what we're trying to do. I mean, there's like co-living operators. Well, I don't think they're similar to us. So there's Outpost. There's Outside. These are co-living brands. Outside is in lots of places around the world, but they're sort of apartments, service apartment type stuff. So it's not similar. But the idea that we can count our inspiration points on like a hand, which means there's like great opportunity in what we're doing. So,
and I'm curious about, there was a conversation at the network level with Impact Hub, like when WeWork kind of entered in the market. Do we approach this as competition, or do we approach this as possibly a path to like scaling and reaching more people? I am really curious at the next level, and maybe something to explore is like, how might we have more network-based partnerships? If the Draper Startup House network partnered with another network in ways that were, because to your point about Selena, like it came from, there's a lot of expertise around real estate, and that's one pillar, but like how do you also bring in the pillar of community, the pillar of other aspects? Could you have 3 strong partners that own their markets in these areas to bring their minds together and create a sort of a macro network of spaces in partnership? That could be another interesting way to look at it. And we don't know what next year is going to bring. I think part of it's like testing, and
we don't know. But I think the market is massive, and when you try to create a new category, it's challenging. But if you can crack the code, then it's a massive opportunity.
Are you feeling optimistic that travel's going to bounce back?
Oh, I'm super optimistic.
Really soon?
Yeah. I'm betting on humanity. So
we got this.
we got this.
Come on.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I've learned a lot about Impact Hub, as well as just what we need to do. I think your advice on partnerships is really awesome.
And it's just finding the right partner. That's the hard part. It's easy to say partnerships, but as I mentioned, high risk and reward, because the wrong partnerships can take you down the wrong paths. But the right ones, they can be pretty transformative. But I'm so excited to hear and to follow what's next. I've been a supporter even before you were.
Yeah, you've stayed here.
I've stayed here. I feel like I was like the, I don't know, like initial backer. Like
you were. You were. Thank you so much. All right, under 1 minute. Perfect.